Consistent self-improvement, everybody. You are now listening to American gypC Podcast, and I am your host, Classic. I am here with my co-host,
gypC, and today we have Fiona Demark. She is an inspirational speaker, resilience coach, and healer from Australia. Welcome, Fiona.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have.
It's a pleasure having you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. So you're in Australia right now. What is it like growing up in Australia?
I actually grew up in really interesting part of Australia, so very outback kind of a place called Broken Hill. So if you have ever come across the movie called Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, which I believe was quite famous worldwide, and seen some of the red dirt, that's pretty much the atmosphere that I grew up in. So very. What you see on the tourism ads was pretty much what I grew up with. Not the beaches, but the red dirt and the kangaroos jumping around and literally snakes in the backyard. So that was all a bit of adventure. And something that makes me a little bit unique, I guess, is my experience of growing up as someone legally blind. So to today, I live in Melbourne, and am running my business and working a government job and doing a lot of other bits and pieces, but doing that as someone who is living with a disability as well.
Okay. So what actually, walk us through as far as growing up partially blind?
Yeah, look, as a kid, I was very blessed in the sense that, there was probably always someone there looking out for me. And so although I have always had quite significantly deteriorated vision when it comes to, seeing in dark areas and things like that, my general ability wasn't so bad when I was younger. My eyesight has deteriorated across the years. And so as a young child, kind of, primary school age, up until about sort of, 10, 12, my vision was reasonable enough to sort of, not have a huge impact upon the things that I wanted to do. And I think because I grew up in such a remote location, there was not a lot of resources for special assistance either. And so essentially that kind of made me be quite resilient and kind of just work out how to get on with things. And so there was no special school or anything like that. It was just mainstream education with a few little bits sort of, processing along the way to make it work for me. And it wasn't until I was a teenager that sort of all of a sudden you get that huge identity crisis as a teenager, and you sort of start to think, where's your place in the world and in the community? And, I did question myself a lot in relation to where I sat with my disability and what kind of future I had. And that left me in quite a difficult space for a while, and, felt like I didn't really have a lot of connection and support from other people. And just once again, due to the remoteness of where I grew up, it was something that I hadn't experienced other people with a similar situation as myself either. And so it was a bit of a discovery of working out a lot of stuff on my own, and then, coming to conclusions about which way I was going to go with that for life.
How have some of the advancements in technology aided with some of the disabilities you've had over the years?
Oh, it's amazing. I think now, what I would do without technology, even just the simple things like, built-in accessibility on things like Apple products. So, I use the same iPhone as everybody else. I use an iPad just like everybody else, and it's got built-in features to have a voiceover. I've got special talking software on my computer which then reads everything out. So imagine using your computer with no screen and no mouse, just a keyboard shortcut for everything, and then a little extra voice sort of, reading everything out on the screen. And, those advances in technology have been something that have been, gradually implemented along the years. And I think, if I was to look back at the things that were available as I was growing up, certainly there's a lot of advantages to that technology in terms of being able to access things like education and the workplace, and just general everyday activities that everybody takes for granted. If you couldn't use your mobile phone, what would that be like?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's a different world completely. What are some of the I guess the goals and dreams and that they, I guess, in Australia or where you're from, that most that's usually in the community, or that's there in Australia, that's a little different from what we have here in America?
I think Australians as a whole are quite laid back. We've got quite a chill kind of attitude, and I know that certainly is the case with some people in America as well. So, but I think we do pick up on a lot of that pop culture kind of stuff. And so it's a little bit of a combination, and I think as generations change, and once again, that's probably very related to technology. So as I was growing up, there was still quite a large influence from, maybe our British background here in Australia, where now I guess there's so much influence through things like Instagram and TikTok and whatever else, that especially the younger generations are, quite Americanized in many of the ways. I remember there's a very funny story actually. When my daughters were quite young, they were playing with Barbie dolls, and they put the American accent with the Barbie dolls, and they just automatically did it. They'd seen Barbie on the movie or whatever, and so they would walk up, and I said, why does Barbie have an American accent? And they're like, I don't know, that's just because it is. And it's really interesting, that influence of all of those little bits and pieces. And we do live in a very multicultural society here in Australia. And so I would like to think that we pick up the best of everything and sort of shove it all together and turn it into whatever it becomes, quite genuinely Australian. But, it's very unlike what you generally would see of Australia in the tourism ads and all of that sort of stuff, in terms of, we don't necessarily have the kangaroos bouncing down the road. Although I do have a funny story. In fact, they actually were literally bouncing down the road outside of my house at Christmas time, which was very, very random.
This is recently? Or with
as in a couple of months ago.
Wow.
Early in the morning, we live pretty close to some bushland, and they were obviously taking the opportunity when everything was quiet to change locations. And literally, there was a mummy and baby kangaroo just leaping down the street.
Wow.
I was actually going to ask earlier if it is like what we hear, like there's a lot of different animals, just everywhere. That's what I hear of Australia.
Yeah.
Certainly where I grew up, it was very much like that. As I mentioned briefly before, I mean, there was quite often a snake in the backyard in the summertime that was going to try and kill you. But,
wow.
Generally as a rule, if you leave things alone, I go walking in the national park quite often. And, last week we seen kangaroos eating their breakfast. A couple of weeks before that, we seen a snake going into the bushes. And you just sort of avoid them. You're kind of aware of the fact that you're sharing the space with them, and just go, oh, okay, yep, as long as I don't antagonize things, they're not going to try and eat me, so we're all good.
Yeah. I love nature, but I've never encountered a kangaroo, so I would like to have that experience one day, maybe to visit Australia. I've never been to Australia. I've been to a couple of other places, but never Australia. Maybe you encountered deers here.
Yes.
What's some coyotes? We're in California now.
Yep, that'd be cool.
There are a couple of other, of course, raccoons and possums and stuff very often. Yeah, but it's not quite, I guess, the poisonous level of Australia or the venomous level.
Yeah. Cute rather than I will kill you by biting you and whatever else. Yes.
Yeah.
And many people do not get to experience. I mean, I've been very lucky in the sense that I have had that experience, but if you spend all of your time in the city, you potentially don't have that experience of the animals. And even not so long ago, I went to holidays in northern Australia, up in Queensland, and I went to the Australia Zoo. So you may be familiar with the Irwin families like Steve Irwin and Bindi Irwin, who have done quite a bit of Australian sort of publicity in from America. And I went to the animal park that was facilitated by their family, and they did have many sort of hands-on things. Like if you go to my Instagram, you can see me patting kangaroos and koalas and stuff.
Okay.
And it was actually really interesting. It was a great opportunity to have that hands-on experience, and I guess a lot of people would have never had the opportunity to do that before they go and visit a place like that either. So it's not just people from outside Australia that haven't had those animal experiences. It's quite often the people from inside Australia that don't even have them.
Oh, okay.
So, what inspired you to get into doing, inspirational speaking and coaching?
Look, I come from a social work background, so it kind of goes back a little bit to that teenage me that didn't really know which way I wanted to go, and at a point of I guess a bit of a dark depression, I kind of realised, well, I've got the opportunity to share my story and help other people, and by doing that, I thought, okay, well, let's go and study a social work course. So I did that, and then dabbled in a lot of like natural therapy kind of bits and pieces, and then eventually came across the life coaching as well while we're in COVID times. And I thought, well, that's the perfect bridge to match the more sort of structured social work counselling kind of perspective with the more sort of alternative therapy kind of stuff. And so it was then the opportunity where I thought, well, I'm in a unique position where I've now got these skills that I actually can make a difference. And not everybody that has a disability has the opportunity to make a difference and step up and use their story to, advocate for change and advocate for, their peers. And I think if I'm in that position, then I guess it's kind of my community service in some ways to actually, step up to the plate and actually try and make the world a bit of a better place for everybody.
Yeah.
What's like what are some common things that people come to you for?
The best thing is it's quite unique. Everyone's different story, and that's why I love the coaching so much, is because it can take on whatever perspective you like. And so it might be that just people are a little bit stuck and they don't know where they're going, and everything seems to be sort of circling around and they just feel unhappy and aren't even sure why. Versus someone that has a specific goal to say, well, look, I'm unhappy in my job and I want to do something else, or my social life isn't quite what I would like it to be, and I need some guidance to kind of work out where I can go to improve those specific things. So it really does depend. And the best thing about coaching is it is very specific to whoever that individual is that comes along. It's not a structure in the sense of, okay, well, this is a particular program that we follow. It's more, okay, well, what do you need? And let's work from that basis instead. So it pretty much gives all sorts of different outcomes.
For some of our young listeners that may be listening, what are some of the challenges that you may come across when parenting as with disabilities?
I really did question when it came to thinking about my disability and whether I could even be a parent. And there was a lot of negative self-talk that went on in my head, and a lot of questions about, what was I going to do with the child ate Lego? You always hear those horror stories of ended up in the emergency room because the kid's eaten Lego and has choked, and now it's a big disaster. And I thought, oh my gosh, what happens if that happens to my child? Because I can't see it eating the Lego. And then the logic kicked in somewhere, and I went, well, you know what? Most parents don't see the child eating the Lego. That's the problem. So I thought, okay, well, let's just not have Lego at our house and we should be okay. So, it was a case of just working out what it is that happens to work for me. And looking back now, my daughters are now 16 and 18, and look, there were certainly things that they experienced differently across their life, but at the same token, I think they've had the opportunity to then think about things differently and create a non-judgmental attitude. And I think that's really important. And that was evident from really young onwards. I remember it would have been at least 10 years ago, so they would have only been maybe 6 and 8 at the time. And we were at the local shopping centre, and they kind of, we'd been to the bathrooms, and they'd say, oh, just wait over here for a moment, Mum. And they sort of, parked me off to the side, and they come back a few minutes later and I said, what were you guys up to? And they said that they had gone to help a lady to use the door on the accessible bathroom because it wasn't an automatic door, and she was in a wheelchair and she was struggling to keep the door open while she accessed the bathroom. And I thought, wow, at that age, to be able to just decide that they were going to go and be helpful to somebody that was obviously in need, I thought, you know what, like that is my disability actually making a difference to their lives as well. And, if I've taught them to process people in a different way and to not judge them and to be a little bit more creatively thinking about the way that they deal with people, then I think that's been an absolute success.
That's beautiful.
I guess.
No, I didn't have a question. I'm sorry.
I guess I was going to ask, what are some things that helped you when you're going through challenges, whether it's, books or people
Meditation.
or meditation. What are some things that help you, keep balance?
Yeah. And I think, all of the above. I think it's a task for everybody to work out what it is when you're in those moments that's going to work for you, and not the same thing is going to work every time. And so I must admit, I am very reliant on reading. I use audiobooks all of the time, and absolutely would be lost without the ability to read, because I think sometimes that's escapism. And so no matter what's happening in my life, I can always go and learn something from a book, or go and escape into a fiction book and put myself in another place and time. So I think that's a really good thing. Listening to music, going and doing some exercise, spending time with friends. And I think it's always really important to know who your connections are and what kind of connection you're going to have with them when you're in need. And it might be that that's that person that you can cry on their shoulder and know that they're not going to judge you and they'll just listen to whatever it is. Or it might be the friend that you call to be able to say, hey, I've had a bit of a rubbish day, and they can tell you something funny, and you will always end up having a laugh and moving on from whatever it was that was your problem. So being able to identify what different people can offer to you, and being able to resource those things at the time.
When I was looking through your information, I realized you do some healing work and some Reiki. I've just recently came across Reiki. Can you speak to that a little bit and what you do with it?
Mm-hmm. So Reiki has been around primarily, I guess, kind of hit the Western world in the 1920s. And so, wow, I just realised that's 100 years ago. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago now. And so, and essentially, I guess I was introduced to Reiki by a friend, and I didn't know anything about it. But one day I was at her house and I had a migraine headache, and she says, hey, I've just learnt this new thing. And I'm like, well, I don't know, let's give it a go. Anything's worth a try. And it did actually, make a difference to my headache. And you can look at it from a different sort of perspective and go, oh, maybe it was just the placebo effect of, laying down quietly for half an hour and having somebody sort of, calm me. But having said that, I do believe in the extra sort of energetic healing. And regardless of the way that we think about this is, I guess we live in quite a disconnected society. And so even just to have someone spend some time with you where they're totally focused on you for half an hour or an hour, and they're giving you energy and you're getting that personal touch, I think that's one of the greatest things about Reiki or any kind of any kind of healing modality where you're spending time in the same place as somebody. But I decided that I was interested enough in this that I wanted to learn how to do it, and then eventually learn how to teach other people. So I went through the steps and became a Reiki master. And I must admit, I don't do a lot of healings as such for people that I don't know, but always incorporated into my life. So there's not a day that goes by where I'm not doing some kind of, energy healing on the cat or my husband, or, whatever happens. So, I probably should be doing it on the technology a little bit more and see whether that's a little bit more kind to me, especially after this week. But we'll see. Usually, I get frustrated and start to swear at the technology instead of going with the hands-on, kindly approach. Maybe I need to go with the alternative.
Yeah, it can get a little frustrating with the technology sometime. gypC's more of the tech than I am, so I understand what you mean by that sometimes. Yeah.
Although I must admit, it was quite funny when my laptop died and I was in a Zoom meeting and I couldn't take myself off of mute, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And I called my husband to come and help because he actually works in IT. So I thought, if anyone's going to be able to fix this, he will be able to. Because you realise that your screen's not turned on, and I'm like, well, I use a screen reader. I don't rely on it. So therefore, no, I didn't.
No.
And it turned out that the laptop had actually died.
And
the screen not working was just the beginning of a whole kit of problems. But it was like, just because the screen's not on doesn't mean that I still can't be using it with my voiceover.
So what is your favorite screen reader? What do you
It depends. So I guess I've always been a Windows user when it comes to computers. So there's a software program called JAWS, and it is very customizable and reads everything out. But having said that, just the capacity to be able to use the phone or the iPad and surf Facebook or Instagram or whatever, the Apple accessibility is really good as well. So they're the main two that I would be using.
I'm actually familiar with one of the things I do at work is make sure sites that I work with are accessible. So, I'm familiar with some of the screen readers and ways to make things more accessible. Do you feel like overall the online, and when you're doing things online, do you feel like the accessibility in general is getting better?
It is absolutely getting better. There's still things that need to be fixed, and little bits of programming that someone obviously just hasn't put in a lot of thought into the accessibility. So Instagram is a perfect example, actually, in the sense that you go to one section of Instagram, like you make a post, and the area that you type your caption in, everything is lovely and accessible, and it all reads perfectly and everything's lovely. You go to do a reel and you go to that same caption area, and it suddenly doesn't want to play nicely with the accessible voiceover software and doesn't read out what you're typing and won't let you paste. And it's really interesting how you think, oh, well, presumably those two things should be set to be very similar. And, from a perspective of someone who is not using the voiceover, they probably wouldn't even realize that those two features behave completely differently. But for some reason, they've been programmed differently. And one is lovely to use and the other one not so much. So it's just a case of, I guess the more awareness that's out there about accessibility and the accessibility guidelines, I think the more, organisations will pick it up. And I'm certainly finding that, you go and visit, shopping websites and things like that, they're definitely much, much better than what they used to be.
How does it work with apps? Like, I know how, screen readers and things like that would help you use a computer. Um, how do you use a phone, I guess? Do screen
Yeah,
readers
in
work?
most circumstances, it's okay. Most circumstances is okay. Certainly there are apps that have been designed that are not accessible, and it's really frustrating actually. Like, I mean, I have often, you know, paid my couple of dollars and downloaded my app and then go to use it and it just reads out button, button, button. And I'm like, well, that's not really helpful at all. So, you know, that's really frustrating. And generally, I will try to always make sure that I give feedback to the developers if they've got the option to do so, to say, well, hey, you know, look, this is not accessible. But having said that, yeah, like it's a bit 50-50, but most of the time, you know, the larger kind of programs that and apps that most people would use, as a general rule, they do tend to be quite accessible.
Well, before we get ready to close things out, was there anything you'd like for our listeners to know about any projects that you have coming up or anything
Where they can find you.
where they can find your information?
Yeah. So I am all over the socials. So if you look up Fiona Demark, you'll find me, Blind Inspiration, on Instagram and Facebook. And my surname is like Denmark without the N, so nice and easy to remember. And I also do have a website which has some free ebooks and stuff on there as well. And that one is www.fionademark.com.au.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We really appreciate you coming on to the podcast and giving us your time and consideration and educating us on as far as the life in Australia and even just what it's like to come up and share your experience with us.
And for the podcast, you can find us at AmericanGypC.com. We also have merch at luamlee.com. And we also have some music.
You can check out some music at Classic Carpenter. That's KlassicCarpenta. And that's on all major platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Tidal, YouTube, all major platforms. Thank you to our listeners again. Thank you again, Fiona, and consistent self improvement to everyone. And peace.